Hey grade 12s and welcome to this video. In this video, we are going to be working on the mathematics paper 2 and this is for 2023. So this is the preparatory exam, meaning it was written in August or September. It is also specifically for the Gauteng province. So this exam is 3 hours and the marks allocated to it is 150 marks. Okay, so with that being said, let's get into this paper. So we are on question 1, and question 1 says, a survey was conducted among a group of learners to compare the time spent on Instagram to the time spent on TikTok. So the results are shown in the table below. So this is the time spent on Instagram in minutes and the time spent on TikTok. And they're already represented in a scatter plot. As you can see, the time spent on Instagram is what is on the x-axis and then that's on the y-axis. So the first question, 1.1 says, calculate the correlation coefficient of the data. So remember, to do this, you need your bivariate data. Now, it's bivariate data because we have two variables in this data. We don't just have one set of data. So you're going to go on your calculator. I'm going to be using my calculator this time. I know that in the past, I have tried to use a Casio calculator, but I'm just going to stick to this. And because I have a Casio calculator out here, I'll also just make sure to check the steps on that calculator as well so that you can follow along. Okay, so to record this data, let me actually just move this here. You're going to go ahead and press mode on your calculator, and then you're going to see various options. It won't look like mine, but you'll have some options. And I want you to go ahead and pick option 2 for stat. So you're going to take stat, whatever that is on your calculator. And you're going to see other options as well. Now, the type of data we are working with is bivariate data. So these are data that have two variables, okay? So we have X and Y. So what we're going to do is we need to take the one that says number 2A plus BX. So make sure you go for that option. So on my calculator, I'm just going to go ahead and move around like to actually find that. So I'll go to my data and then I'm going to go to where my bivariate data is. Okay. So seems like I already had something recorded there, probably from another exam, but we're going to go ahead and put this in. Remember, this is the values on your x-axis and that's the one on your y-axis. Okay, so when you click that, you're going to see an x and a y column and you need to fill them in. So once you have put in your x values, you'll notice that on your side, you're going to have numbers. Make sure that you end at number 6, so that you know there are actually 6 values in the x-axis. So now on the y, okay, the y values, we're going to go ahead and put down those y values into our calculator. And once you have put down these values, you can go ahead and press AC, Shift, and 1, okay? So on your calculator, you'll see that you have 6 options. And I want you to go ahead and pick the option that says number 5, REG for regression. So when you go for that option, mine, again, it is a little different. So I'll have to go to regression over there. I want you to go ahead and pick the option that has an R because that would be your correlation coefficient. So on your calculator, it will probably be number 3R like that. So I'm going to go ahead and say, what is that? And then press equal to on your calculator. And that is our correlation coefficient. So the correlation coefficient of this data is this number we see here. You can round off to 2 decimals. So that is 0.96. So R equals 0.96. And that is for 1 mark. And we move on to the next question. So the next question, 1.2, says, comment on the strength of the correlation between the time spent on Instagram and the time spent on TikTok. So they're really just asking you for the strength. You don't really have to start giving explanations. However, what they're really just referring to here is when you're looking at the data, right? The data is actually trying to, the data assumes a specific thing. In this case, we have the time that people spend on Instagram. And as you can see, it starts to increase. So for example, over here, we have somebody who spent 30 minutes on Instagram and then they spend 40 minutes on TikTok. And then if somebody spends 45 minutes on Instagram, which is an even higher time, do you see that they start to even spend a lot of time as well on TikTok? Okay, so that is the thing here. We're seeing a trend going on. When someone spends a lot of time on Instagram, they also spend a lot of time on TikTok. Okay. But we have to actually just be simple with this answer. We don't have to overthink it because they just want you to comment on the strength of the correlation. How you comment on the strength of the correlation is like this. So the strength of this correlation, because it's 0.96, okay, 0 would be absolutely no correlation. If you have a correlation of 1, that is a perfect correlation. So 0.96 is within here. As you can see, it's moving more to the right. So these are where you get strong correlations. Okay, so I'll just be specific here. I would just say there is a strong positive, okay, because that correlation is positive. So it just means that the trend is generally increasing. Okay, it's not like a decreasing function, it's an increasing function. So there is a strong positive correlation, and that is enough, really. Okay, moving on to the next question. Then 1.3 says, determine the equation of the least squares regression line for the data. So remember that the regression line's equation is y equals a plus bx. And you would have seen that when you were working on your calculator, okay, to put in your bivariate data. So we just need the value of a and the value of b. And we can use our calculator to find that. So on your calculator, you can just press Shift and 1, okay, to bring back your data so that you can look at it. And you're going to, on your calculator, choose option 5 for regression so that you can get that information. And when you choose that, you're going to see your options for A, B, and R and that, okay? So let's go ahead and pick number 1 for A and say equal to. So if I pick A, what I get here, oh, that's odd A, so it's going to multiply. I need A, which is 8.12, okay, rounded off to 2 decimal places. You can go ahead and also check that. And then B. So again, what I'll just do is erase this. You don't have to do that, but you can just press Shift and 1 on your calculator. And then again, choose number 5 for regression. Then you're going to go for number 2 for B to find that B value. So B is equal to 1.01 rounded off to 2 decimal places. And then we can go ahead and substitute. So this means that the equation of the least squares regression line is y equals 8.12 plus 1.01x. And that is our answer. Okay, now moving on to the next question. Okay, the next question says, predict the time that will be spent on TikTok if a learner spent 115 minutes on Instagram. So we already have the equation of the least squares regression line, and we can use that to make predictions. All you have to do here is see which values exactly do these belong to. So the TikTok, right? Were these the X or the Y value so that we know what we're looking for? Remember that TikTok was on the y-axis, okay? So those are the y values. So they're really asking you to find the y value if your x value, which is Instagram, because Instagram was on the x-axis. So if your x value is equal to 115, and we can use the equation to do that. So y equals 8.12 plus 1.01. And in place of x, we're going to go ahead and substitute our 115 minutes. And you can calculate this on your calculator. So you don't have to worry about the fact that the data is here. It can actually still do calculations normally. So we can go ahead and punch that into the calculator and see exactly what we get when we do that. So 115. And you see our answer. So y is equal to 124.27. So remember that this is in minutes, okay? So you can, of course, tell them minutes. And it's fine if you don't round off in this case, because it is minutes. They can convert that to seconds, but it's fine. It's still in minutes. Okay, so that is our answer over there. And then we move on to the next question. Then question 1.5 says, it was noticed that 4 learners' data was not recorded. Okay, this is very important. 4 learners' data was not recorded. And now they say the mean time of the TikTok users and Instagram users was this. Okay, was 73.4 minutes each. Now, I wonder, do they mean the new time, right? The new mean, because these 4 learners were not recorded, or they speaking about, it's probably the new mean. However, we can actually find out this easily. So, because they say that it is 73.4 minutes each, right? If you wanted to find the old mean, just to ensure that, yes, this is a new mean, we can actually find that out on our calculator. So you can just press Shift 1, and then when you do that, instead of going to regression, we want to find out more about those variables that we have. So you're going to pick number 4, okay, VAR. You go to that, and then you can actually check the mean of the X values. So if it's not this, then you know that this is a new mean that they're actually giving you here. So let's go ahead and check the mean. So you would take option 2 for mean. And yeah, my calculator always does this. So I kind of have to delete everything there first before I can actually get that. So our mean here, Shift 1, and I need to go to that, is this. Okay, 60 point. So yeah, definitely this is a new mean. I was just trying to make sure. So this mean, right, is the new mean they found after they recorded the 4 learners that they forgot to include. Okay, and what they tell us is that the mean time for TikTok and Instagram users was this each. Okay, so we have to keep that in mind. For TikTok, the mean was 73.4, right, minutes. But for Instagram as well, for Instagram, it was also 73.4 minutes as well. So that's what we have. This is when the 4 learners have been included as well. Then they tell us that the researcher commented that the total number of time spent on the 2 social media platforms. So the total number of time spent on these 2 social media platforms combined, right? The 2 of it combined was more than a full day. And the question is, do you agree with the researcher? Motivate your answer by using necessary calculations. So for the time that they spent in total to be more than a full day, we need to actually see the total time spent. I want you to notice that this is the mean, okay? It's not the total time that was spent by all the learners. What this is on average the time that was spent by each learner, okay? So that's the mean, the average really. So on average, we can say each learner spent about 73.4 minutes on each social media site. So now we actually have to find the total amount of time spent on the social media platforms combined, of course. So first of all, let's find that total of TikTok. If we know that the mean is now that, right? Is now this number. Well, how do we calculate the mean? Well, we calculate the mean by finding the sum. Okay, or we can use sigma because that is for sum. So we find the sum of all the X values, okay, and I'm going to say, let's start with TikTok, over the total number of learners, okay, because we want to actually just get the total number of time spent by each learner combined. Now, how many learners are there? Remember that in our data, right, when we looked at this, these are the learners that we have. So they're the same learners in each line. So this is one learner, right? This learner spent 30 minutes on Instagram and 40 minutes on TikTok. So it means that here there was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 learners before. But they told us that they left 4 out. So now it means there's actually a total of 10 learners. Okay, so that's what we're going to have to do. So we can go ahead and find the sum of the total amount of learners. So the mean time, that was 73.4. And that is equal to, we don't know this yet, we're just trying to find that, over 10. So you see now to find the total sum of all those learners, right, the time that they spent on one platform, Instagram, you're going to have to get rid of the 10. You can decide to cross multiply or just multiply both sides by 10 to get rid of that 10. So it would mean that the sum of times that they spent on Instagram would be times 10, which just means that the decimal just moves one place. You can also use a calculator. If you calculate on your calculator, it's not going to erase your data. And so that is 734 minutes in total. And this is for Instagram. But you see that the mean time is exactly the same and there's the same amount of learners. So this is for each platform, okay, for Instagram and TikTok. So now that we have that, the researcher commented that the total number of time spent on the two social medias combined, okay, this is just the total number of time spent on, let's say, Instagram or TikTok. The total number of time for both of it combined would be, you would have to add them together, because this means that they spend 734 minutes on Instagram and 734 minutes on TikTok. So if you add those together, we're going to have to go ahead and work with that. So 7 plus 7 is 14, and then 34 plus 34 is 68. So that's the total amount of time in minutes that they spent combined, okay? And what we have to find out is if the time that they spent was more than a full day. A full day is how many hours? Is 24 hours. So we need to find out if this number is actually greater, if this time is greater than 24 hours. Well, this is in minutes right now. It needs to be in hours to be compared to 24 hours, right? So we can convert that into hours by dividing this by 60. Okay, so if we take that and we divide it by 60, let's see what we get. So we're going to go ahead and say 1468 divided by 60. So we get 24.46 recurring, but you can just round off to that, right? And as you can see, this is in hours, and this is actually bigger than that. So because 24.47 hours is greater than 24 hours, then the time that they spent combined is actually greater than a day, and it means that the researchers were actually correct. So if you look at all the time that the total learners spent on Instagram and TikTok combined, it's actually more than a day, an entire day. Okay, so that is that question, and that was the last question for question 1, and then we move on to question 2. We are on question 2, and question 2 says, the amount of money in rands that a group of learners spent at a theme park on a specific day was recorded. The data is represented in the cumulative frequency graph, an ogive, below. Okay, so there is our ogive, and it's already completed, so you don't have to draw it in this case. So as you can see on the x-axis, we have the money that was spent, and then we have the cumulative frequency. So that has to do with the learners, okay, that spent the money. So we're just recording the amount of money that groups of learners really spent at a theme park, okay. So here is our data. As you can see, we have missing values. And what they tell us is that the data from the cumulative frequency, the ogive, is represented in the incomplete frequency table below. And the first question is, how many learners visited the theme park on that specific day? So they actually want to know the total number of learners. And when we look at this, it's like, how can we actually find the total number if we can clearly see that A and B are missing? Well, they gave us the ogive, and that's the thing about it. You see the ogive, you just have to go to the last point that you had. Okay, it's a cumulative frequency. So the frequency is accumulating. So the highest frequency that you have there, okay, since this is the learners that we have, would be this number over here. That will be the total number of learners that you're finally going to have in total, since we keep adding the learners as we go to the next point. So that, okay, the number that you have there, not just the number here, specifically that point, the Y value is 25. Okay, and that's how we would know that in total, there are actually 25 learners that visited that theme park on that specific day. Okay, so there we go. That is question 1. And then 2.1.2 says, determine the values of A and B in the frequency table. Okay, so we can actually find these values, and how we can find them is by looking at the, well, not really the cumulative frequency. You don't really need that. You can use it. It would be somewhat helpful. But because this is complete, we can actually use that to find this. So A is going to be super easy to find, because how the ogive goes is it starts at 0. like I always explain there, okay, whatever value you have here, see 10, that one, its y value must be 0. And then when we go to the next point, 50, okay, that's going to be the value, the y value that you have there. So as you can see, the y value here is 3, and that's how we know exactly what A is, okay? A is 3, so it means there were 3 learners that spent between 10 Rand to 50 Rand, okay, at that theme park. So that is 3 over there. And then now this becomes so easy to find because only B is missing, and we know the total number of learners they are. There are a total of 25 learners. So this is our equation. We can add everything, 3, the 6, the 8, and the 2, right? And when we get that, B would just be 25 minus the addition of everything, since it's the only thing that is missing. Okay, so that's how we can actually find that there. So let's go ahead and add. If you like, you can make it an equation. So that is the 3 plus the 6, 8, and 2. Okay, so 3 plus 6 plus 8 plus 2. Then you can say plus B is equal to 25, because if you add everything up together, you should get 25. Okay, and then we can just solve for B in this equation. So we can go ahead and say that B is equal to, and we have 25. If you add all of these together, you get 19. Okay, and so you take that positive 19 over and becomes a negative 19, and then 25 minus 19 is going to give you 6. And there we go. So we know what A is. I should have put A down first. Okay, I only wrote it in the diagram, but we know what A is and we know what B is as well. So this is B and A is equal to 3. Okay, so there we go. Moving on to the next question. The next question, 2.1.3, says, use the ogive to determine the percentage of learners that spent more than 175 Rand. So we want the learners to spend more than 175, right? But remember that they want it to be written as a percentage. Determine the percentage, okay? So let's go ahead and find the total learners that spent more than 175. Then we're going to convert that into a percentage. So we can use our diagram, our ogive specifically, to do this. So we're looking for learners that spent more than 175. So where is 175? Okay, so we're just going to have to understand how these intervals work. We have 0, we have 10, 50. If 50 is here, this is the middle. Then between 10 and 50 should be 30, because you can say 10 plus 50 divided by 2, 30. And so since you can see now we're adding 20, see, okay, 10 plus 20 is 30, 30 plus 20 is 50. We should add 20 to get 70 and 20 to give you 90. Okay, so they actually structured this incorrectly. This should not be 10. So as you can see, they structured this a little weirdly. So it's really not something that maybe you should worry about. Let's just try to find 175 like this. Since they are going in this order, we'll start at 50, right? And we can actually just count from here because these ones seem more consistent. So 50 to this midpoint, we can say that that is 75. And then plus 25 is going to be 100. So we're counting in 25s. Okay, plus 25, of course, is 125. Plus 25 is 150. Okay, so to get that, plus 25 would be 175. So there's where 175 is. And then, of course, plus 25 will give you 200. Okay, so now that we know where 175 is, what we can do is to find out the amount of learners that spent 175. First of all, you're going to go ahead and line that up to the ogive. And once you touch the ogive, you go ahead and start going to the side. So I touched it here. I'm going ahead and go to the side like that and find out exactly how much that is. So let's just also see what is this counting in. So we have 15, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So it's in intervals of 1. Okay, so it's just 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, and then 20. So this is how we will find out now the people or the amount of learners that spend more than 175 Rand. It means that the total learners, right, that spent 175 or lower than 175 would have been 19. Remember, This is a cumulative frequency. So it's counting the accumulation of the learners, okay? So for example, if a learner spent between 10 Rand to 50 Rand, we can see that the total amount of learners there was 3 learners that spent it, okay? And then the learners who spent between 50 Rand to 100 Rand, it's not actually 9, okay? What it actually is this 9 represents the total amount of learners that spent from 100 Rand to below 100 Rand. That's what the 9 stands for. So the 9 here, right, includes this 3. So if you actually wanted to separately find out the amount of learners that spent between 50 Rand to 100 Rand, you'd have to say 9 minus 3, which is 6. And that makes perfect sense. You see, the learners who spent between 50 Rand to 100 Rand was 6 learners. Okay, that's what I mean by this is an accumulation of the learners. So if you're looking at this 175, this is the total learners that spent either 175 or anything lower than 175. That was 19. We're trying to find out the learners who spent more than 175. So to find that, we're going to look at this. Since 19 tells us only the learners who spent 175 or less, we're going to go beyond this. By going here, we're trying to look for the learners who spent more than 175 Rand. The highest they could have spent is 250. So since we know that the highest amount they could have spent is 250, we can just go ahead and take this. This 25, remember, stands for the total amount of learners that you have, right? And since the 19 stands for people who spent 175 or less than 175, to find everybody who spent more than 175, you're going to take the total number of learners minus the people who spent either 175 or less than 175. And that would give you everybody here who spent more than 175. So that would be 25 minus 19. That's the calculation we must do there. So 25 minus the 19, which we've actually calculated this before, that gives us 6. So it means that 6 learners spent more than 175. Now, remember that they said that this needs to be put as a percentage. So we're going to say 6 out of how many learners are there? There are 25 learners in total. Then you have to multiply this by 100 to put it in percentage. Okay, so as a percentage. So that is 6 over 25 multiplied by 100, which is 24%. Okay. So what that means is 24% of the learners spend more than 175 Rand. Okay, so that's how to answer these questions that say more than that. You're really just looking at the people who spend more than that, since these are accumulating. Okay, so that is it for that question, and we move on to the next question. Okay, we're on 2.2, and it says, it is further given that there are 2 rides at the theme park: the Intimidator and the Terror Thrills. Now, they say that the mean amount of money spent on these rides are analyzed and is given below. Okay, so this is the mean amount on each of these rides, these 2 rides. Then they tell us that the 2 standard deviations intervals about the mean. That is a very important thing to understand. So 2 standard deviations intervals about the mean for the Intimidator was calculated as this. So that's the interval for 2 standard deviations about the mean. Now explain what that means. If the standard deviation of the Terror Thrills is double, as another piece of information. If the standard deviation of Terror Thrills is double the standard deviation of the Intimidator, we need to calculate the interval for the 1 standard deviation about the mean of the Terror Thrill. So that's really what they want at the end of the day. Calculate the interval for 1 standard deviation about the mean. Okay, let's quickly understand what it means, what they mean by 1 standard deviation about the mean, or 2 standard deviations about the mean. Okay, what do they mean by that? Well, when you're looking at that, you're actually looking at the mean as the focused value, and you're trying to go 1 standard deviation away from the mean. But you can do this in two ways. You can either move one standard deviation away from the mean by adding by a standard deviation. You see, we're by the mean and we want to move one standard deviation away from the mean. Okay, so you would have to add a standard deviation, which if you do that, it's going to give you your mean plus your standard deviation, right? You can do that. And another way to move a standard deviation away from the mean, okay, so that you can be one standard deviation about the mean, or really a standard deviation from the mean, is also to subtract. So we could have added by a standard deviation, okay, but we could have also subtracted by a standard deviation, by one single standard deviation, and that would give you the mean minus the standard deviation. So the interval for one standard deviation, okay, about the mean, let me just call that an SD, about the mean is this. It's going to be mean minus a standard deviation and mean plus standard deviation. That is one standard deviation about the mean. So to understand the two standard deviations interval about the mean, okay, so that two standard deviations about the mean would just be to make sure that you put two standard deviations instead of one. So that would be mean minus two standard deviations and mean plus two standard deviations. So that's what they mean there. So now we can say the two standard deviations interval about the mean, okay, that for the intimidator was calculated to be this. So they already calculated that, and that is the interval that they got. They got 4.8 and 9.2. Okay, so that is that. So as you can see, if you say mean minus standard deviations, you should get 4.8. And if you say mean plus two standard deviations, you should get 9.2. That's really what they mean by that there. Of course, that is for the intimidator. Okay, so it's calculated to be that. Now the question is, if the standard deviation of the terathrills is double the standard deviation of the intimidator. Okay, so it's really just finding those standard deviations. We already know their means, both of their means. But they tell us that if the terathrills, which I'll just call T, if the terathrills one is double the standard deviation of the intimidator, then we need to calculate the interval for one standard deviation about the mean for the terathrills. So we need to calculate this for the terathrills. So the goal is to eventually find out this, okay, to find out the standard deviation about the mean for terathrills, meaning you have the mean, you only need the standard deviation of the terathrills. Okay, so that's all we're looking for, the standard deviation of terathrills. Let's go ahead and use what they gave us. Since we know that two standard deviations about the mean for the intimidator are these, it means that you need to take the mean minus two standard deviations and it should give you 4.8. Okay, and we can actually use this to find the standard deviation of that ride, okay, specifically that intimidator first of all. So let's go ahead and calculate this. Well, we know the mean is, they told us the mean for the intimidator, since this is the intimidator's data that we have here. Okay, since they told us that, we're going to go ahead and take that mean, 13.20, right, and substitute it in place of the mean. So we're saying minus two standard deviations is equal to 4.8. So let's solve for the standard deviation. You can take your negative two standard deviation over, so it becomes positive two standard deviation, and you have 13.20 minus 4.8. So we can actually just calculate that here. So 13.20 minus 4.8, which is 8.4, is equal to two standard deviations. Then if you divide both sides by 2 to find that standard deviation, then that's going to give us, so our answer divided by 2 gives us 4.2. Okay, now the reason I'm not just going to go ahead and run with this and say, yes, this is my answer, is because they gave us the interval, okay, for two standard deviations about the mean for that intimidator ride. Okay, intimidator, they told us that. Now, I can't just use one of it. I have to ensure that this is actually true. since we have both the intervals, we have both values, okay? So I'm going to also do the same thing for here. If this is really the standard deviation, it should also work out here as well. So if I say the mean plus 2 standard deviations is equal to this number, 9.2, I should end up with that same standard deviation value. So let's go ahead and do that. The mean, again, is still 13.20, right? And we're saying plus 2 standard deviations is equal to 9.2. And if you say 2 standard deviations, leave that alone. And you say 9.2 minus 13.20, because we're taking that over, you can already see this is going to be negative, and I can already see it's not going to work out properly. So if you say 9.2 minus 13.2, because that's really what they are, 20, okay, it's the same thing as 2 in this case because it's a decimal. It's negative 4 that we get. And if you divide both sides by 2, your standard deviation here is negative 2. So I can already see that the standard deviations are not the same. So something is wrong with this interval. The interval is not correct because the standard deviation is not consistent. So there might be a mistake in this question because they didn't really ask us to find out whether this was the interval. They told us find one standard deviation about the mean for tetradrals. So I think this might have been an error, maybe, okay, but you would still have to kind of do this to show them that you are using the information that they gave you to find what they asked you to find. So I'll just tell them that the interval for this, okay, 2 standard deviation interval about the mean is incorrect as the standard deviation is inconsistent. It's not consistent. It's not the same. It's supposed to be the same. Since it's one specific interval we're referring to, the standard deviation must be the same thing there. Okay, so that's what I'm going to just tell them in conclusion. So my conclusion is the calculation of the 2 standard deviations interval about the mean for the intimidator is incorrect because 2 different standard deviations were used. So we can see that they were not the same. Because of that, we can't really calculate anything because anything we calculate is just going to be incorrect. Okay, so there's no calculation can be done. Okay, no calculation can be done, finally. So that is it for question 2, okay, 2.2. There's nothing we can do there, but you get the idea. We're just supposed to find this, and knowing that the tetradrals, right, okay, that standard deviation was double of that. Okay, we could have used that to finally find out the interval for one standard deviation about the mean. But we can't in this case because there's an inconsistency here. Okay, so that is it for question 2, and then we move on to question 3.